On the show today, we sit down with Thea Kelley. She provides coaching on all aspects of job search, from resumes to interviewing. Thea is the author of a book called Get That Job, the quick and complete guide to a winning interview. I'm thrilled to be talking with Thea today about being both authentic and strategic during your interviews.
This is The Career Cue, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Dana Redmond.
Welcome to The Career Cue, Thea.
Hi, it's great to be here.
I'm so excited to talk about this topic. So I've heard you mention you consider sort of authenticity and strategy the yin and the yang of a convincing job interview. So why do you think it's necessary for an interviewee to think about both of those?
Okay, well, so for starters, rapport is very important in an interview. Having a feeling of connection between the person being interviewed and the interviewer. And that has more effect on the results of the interview than we may realize. And in order to have that rapport and that feeling of connection, the interviewer has to feel that you're being authentic, that they're talking to the real you. On the other hand, you need to also be strategic because it's a competitive job market, and the interviewer may be interviewing several other people, and you need to stand out from all those people. So you need to market yourself and sell yourself. And as we all know, sales and marketing, they require strategy, and so does interviewing. As I coach people for interviews, I discover that most of them are falling down in either the area of authenticity or strategy or both. For instance, many people are not being authentic enough in that they may find some correct answers online or that are recommended to them from friends. And they're giving these correct answers, which may be truthful, but they aren't their own words, and it doesn't wind up sounding real. Or their authenticity may be undermined by using cliches and sounding like everybody else, or by being so nervous and stiff that they aren't really seeming like they're being themselves. And on the other hand, in terms of not being strategic enough, people may just answer questions as if they're filling in a form, rather than really selling themselves with their answers. So maybe or they may be winging it. They may underprepare, and so they're really being themselves, but not necessarily being their best self.
That's so interesting to think about, needing to have that balance, right, between the two. That would be putting your best foot forward at the same time, having it be the best you, right, there.
Yeah.
So how should a job seeker think about interview strategy? I mean, what does that really mean?
Okay, so that means that, first of all, you're proactively selling yourself for the role. You're not just going into the interview trusting that the interviewer is going to ask the right questions that are going to bring out the best in you. You're knowing that because you know you need to stand out and you need to be memorable, you've got some kind of a plan to do that. You've analyzed what it is about you that can make you stand out and what it is about you that is memorable, and how you're going to convey that. And that revolves a lot around what I call key selling points. And that is knowing there may be 100 reasons why the employer should hire you, but they can't remember 100, and if you hit them with 100, it's going to be a big blur. What are the top 3 or the top 5 things that you would like them to really be sure and take away from that interview about why they should hire you instead of the other people? And so identifying those key selling points can be really important.
And how does somebody go about figuring out what their key selling points are?
You can ask yourself questions like, what is it about me that stands out? What have my past employers and coworkers commented on? Have people said, I can always count on you for fill in the blank? Why did you get hired for your most recent position? What is it that made you stand out there? What do you get appreciated for? What can you do better than other people? Are you the first or the best or the only one in a certain area? What's your ace in the hole? What enables you to do your job really well? So ask yourself questions like that and make a list of all the possible candidates for key selling points. And then you need to narrow it down to just those that are most relevant, exceptional, and verifiable. And that's an acronym that I use. It's selling points that REV. because they have R.E.V, relevant, exceptional, and verifiable. So let me give you an example. Just today, I got an email from a prospective client saying she liked my book and it caused her to look at what her own REV points were. And so one of her REV points she says here is, I'm passionate about finding creative solutions that simplify and clarify processes to get the job done. And she's looking for a job as an admin, which is important to say because, what's relevant, right? It has to be relevant to the specific job. So yes, this is definitely finding creative solutions and improving processes is very relevant to an admin job. So she gets a check mark on relevant. So is it exceptional? That's where it's a little weak here because a lot of people are, or say they are, passionate about finding creative solutions and improving processes. It's a very common claim in job interviews. So she may be exceptionally passionate about that. More importantly, she may be exceptionally good at actually doing it, actually coming up with those better solutions. So this can become an exceptional selling point if she can back it up with stories or testimonials, maybe a LinkedIn profile recommendation, or even sometimes, and this sort of bleeds over into what makes it verifiable too. So a lot of times people have key selling points that are really kind of a matter of opinion. And this one here, I'm passionate about finding creative solutions. It's kind of a matter of opinion whether you're passionate about it or not. So you need to be able to verify something for it to become an effective key selling point to make you stand out in an interview. What I mean by verify, it doesn't really mean it has to be proven scientifically, but it either has to be a fact, like saying I have an MBA. That's verifiable. And in fact, they probably will background check it. Or saying I have 5 years experience doing software development. That's pretty verifiable. But when you get into areas of soft skills, it's a little harder to make those into powerful key selling points, although they are important, and it's not a bad idea to have one or two of your key selling points be soft skills. But you have to verify it, either by telling a story that demonstrates it, or quoting somebody else vouching for it, or giving specifics that strongly evidence it. For instance, let's get to another key selling point this lady's got. Well, I'll stick with that one. Finding creative solutions was the one. She could make that verifiable by making sure that in her resume she tells stories about how she did that. And she could make it verifiable by even telling like a little 5-second or 15-second story the minute she names that selling point in an interview. So let me come to another one here. She says, I communicate well and bring a lot of presence and clarity to the table. Those are very important qualities, and they're very relevant to an admin. They're not necessarily exceptional. It depends how exceptionally well she communicates and so on. So if she can maybe tell a story that illustrates that she really is exceptional in that, and how to verify that. One way that she verified that is I saw in her resume that she had actually written documentation for software applications. She had written for newsletters. She had facilitated meetings. So there's both written and oral communication there. So you see, it is important to make sure that all of your selling points are relevant, exceptional, and verifiable, that they really rev.
I love that. I love that acronym, the REV. So I'd love to drill into each of those a little bit. As I think about the relevant, how does somebody go about finding, what are the relevant skills or what are the relevant selling points I should be sure I'm bringing up? Because I would imagine, depending on the job I'm interviewing for, those relevant points will be different. While I might have my top 10 key selling points, I maybe only want to bring up the most relevant for that. So how do I go about figuring that out for each job?
That's a really good question, and you can find a lot of clues in the job postings that you look at. Those are a really great source of seeing what employers are interested in and concerned about. However, you have to take some things with a grain of salt, especially when you find these very long, very official sort of job postings that have a very HR flavor to them, and they include things like being able to lift a certain amount of weight and so on, and a lot of soft skills. Because then they have got a lot of things in that posting that really are not what's going to get you hired. They're what's going to make you good on the job once you get there. But the posting still, if they're saying a whole lot about engaging staff and rewarding staff and 10 years experience managing staff, then you know that one of your key selling points probably should be something about managing people. And it's about the intersection between what you're seeing in the postings and what you bring to the table, and what are the places where those are the same.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Those are going to be the especially relevant things. What are the things that are hard for employers to find? Is there some particular technical skill you have that most of the other candidates don't? That would be especially relevant because they're really hungry for it. So relevant you could also take to mean, what do they want?
Oh, that's an interesting take on that, right? So it's not necessarily what they are calling out as specifics in that job posting, but it could be what you know or believe needs to be there that maybe they're not even sure they need yet, right? That would make somebody very successful.
Maybe a combination of the two.
Mm-hmm.
Although you have to watch out, if you're trying to second guess them, because you might start thinking, here's a really good example of relevance. I've had people say one of my key selling points is my integrity. So is that relevant to the job? Yes, it is relevant. However, it's not exceptional. I guess that's the problem there. It's kind of something that everyone is presumed to have, and it's kind of a bare minimum.
Right. Almost just the table stakes to come in to interview for the job or to be considered for the job. There are some of those out there, and integrity is one of them. Most job descriptions would not say we want somebody that does not have integrity, right? So
Right.
So I get relevant. So let's talk about that exceptional. That one feels somewhat challenging to figure out. Like, what are those exceptional qualities? What makes an individual exceptional? How does somebody pull those out or consider what is really exceptional?
Mm-hmm. Well, for starters, you have to be not too humble. A lot of times I've been coaching somebody for an hour for interviews, and then they tell me some fabulous thing about themselves, and I'm like, you've been holding out on me. Why did you not tell me that sooner? So, as I said, exceptional might be something where you are really better than the other people around, and where you're the best or where you're the only one, or where you're the first. For instance, if you are the first, you're in a high position in your company and you're the first person to be promoted into that company with less than 5 years experience. That would be something that's exceptional. Or it could be something as simple as the employer is looking for someone with a minimum of 3 years experience and you have 5. That could be a little bit exceptional. Now, watch out if they want 3 years of experience and you have 15, because that's going to overqualify you.
Yeah, I guess as I think about, for me, I am passionate about the Career Q and what we're doing in bringing sort of the one-to-many career counseling and information out there. But I would struggle, I think, to say that am I more exceptional than somebody else in some of those areas? And maybe it goes back to that humble piece. How would you recommend that people get over maybe the being too humble or being humble and maybe not knowing that they are exceptional in an area? Are there any key recommendations you'd have there?
Really good question. Yeah, getting over being too humble. One thing is to remember that by being very clear and explicit about what's exceptional about you, you're helping. You're being very helpful because that's what the employer wants to know. That's exactly what they have brought you in to find out. So try and think of it as being helpful. And then sometimes you're great at something, but you take it for granted because you feel like anybody who's worth their salt is going to be doing things at that level of quality. That's just the standard. And you may never have asked yourself, okay, but is that really the level of quality that most people in my field operate at? I've asked clients that question and had them say, oh, no, I work with people who don't do it that way. And then I'll say to them, okay, so would you say that you're one of the better people on your team of 20? Well, yeah. So you think you're maybe in the top 5? Yeah. Okay. So we've just discovered that you're exceptional. And it may turn out, with some further questioning, that because of their being in the top 5 on their team of 20, they've been singled out for especially challenging assignments, and that they're the go-to person. And voila, now we have some specific little facts with which to back up the opinion that they're exceptional on their team.
That's an interesting take. Yeah. Consider is there something that you think you're good at? Am I exceptional? But do you just take that for granted? Again, sort of, is that just that, I think about stuff as the table stakes. Like, I feel like I got to be able to do something really well here, just even be able to walk in. And that may not be the case for everybody else. Their level of delivery may be different. So that's an interesting way to sort of, I think, suss out, whether you think you're exceptional in an area. And I do love the idea you mentioned, right? Think about you being helpful in that interview. Like, your own history and you know what you're good at. And the interviewer doesn't, right? They probably have looked at your resume, maybe looked at a LinkedIn profile. But other than that, they don't know much about you. So I love that idea of, by bringing forth your things that you are exceptional about, you're actually being helpful to them and really exposing, what you are good at for them so they don't have to try to wonder about it.
Yep, you said it.
And then, so on the verifiable, right, I think that that's interesting. As you talked about exceptional, and maybe that's led to more interesting assignments or bigger projects. Is that part of being verifiable? Like, could that be part of your story of how you can verify that you are great at a particular skill? Do you think that's a piece of verifiable?
Absolutely, yes. The fact that you've been given special assignments or that you're a go-to person, those are facts that give firm evidence for your being exceptional and for the fact that you have that selling point.
Wonderful. So we've talked a lot about sort of the strategy part of an interview. So what about authenticity? I mean, isn't it really just being yourself and telling the truth?
No, it's really more than that, because you can absolutely tell the truth and still sound kind of phony. And people have probably, almost everybody listening to this has probably had this experience in an interview that they don't really feel like they're being themselves, but they are telling the truth. So how to tell the truth and make sure you sound authentic? Firstly, I find that people, if they're preparing a lot for the interview, which I do recommend in order to be strategic, they will start to kind of memorize a script. And there's nothing that more quickly makes you sound inauthentic than saying something that you've said the exact same way 10 times as you prepared for it. Part of the problem with scripts is that the way we write is not how we talk. When you write, you might say, I possess certain skills, but people never in a conversation say, yeah, I possess the skill of. So instead of using a script, what I advise people when you're preparing what you want to say, for instance, in answer to a certain question, like, tell me about yourself, prepare an outline of talking points. Okay, first I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about that. Talking points that, by the way, should correspond pretty closely to your key selling points or your R.E.V points. But don't write out the exact language you're going to say, so that as you practice answering that question, you're making up new language each time, but always talking about the same points. So memorize your talking points, but not your script. Be conversational. Like I said, don't use stiff language like I possess certain skills. Don't overuse jargon. Be natural in the way you talk. Use details and specifics. It doesn't sound as authentic to say, I motivate my team by recognizing their efforts. It sounds more authentic to say, I inherited a reward and recognition program from my previous manager, but I wasn't sure it was really working, so I met with my employees and we reworked it, and that really got everybody motivated. So that's telling a little story to be more authentic. You could also paint the picture, be a little more specific and real with something much shorter by saying something like, instead of I motivate my team by recognizing their efforts, you say, one of my team members told me recently, I don't hesitate to do more here and to volunteer for extra things because I know you've got my back. By using more real kind of language and more specifics, you sound more authentic. And one last thing about sounding authentic is, to some extent, it comes from being present. And I was just buying my 2017 calendar for the year, and I saw this great calendar I wound up buying called the Enlightened Rumi. It had quotations from this 13th century Persian philosopher and poet. And one of the quotations was, when you're everywhere, you're nowhere. When you're somewhere, you're everywhere. I know that's kind of trippy and confusing, but I had to think about it a lot. But I realized what he meant was, if your mind is everywhere and you're kind of scattered, you're not really being where you are. But when you're really being where you are, I don't know what he meant then by you are everywhere, but when you're really being where you are, you're in touch with reality. Maybe that's what he meant. You're open to what is really happening and all the possibilities of what's really happening. So do whatever you can to really be present when you're in the interview. Breathe, think about that interviewer as a human being, and be ready to really be there, because then you can seem more authentic.
Yeah, that's an interesting piece to that, right? And I think we've started to hear more and more about being present. And, in an interview setting, you can be fairly nervous, right? And you're kind of constantly thinking, what's their next question? Or as they're asking a question, you're thinking about what your answer is, possibly versus, really connecting with that person, which may give you then that air of being inauthentic because you're so focused on, do I get that right? Did I get that last answer right? Or what am I going to say to this new answer or this new question?
And things like that in interviewing, like being present, things that are come down to habit and who you are and very internal and unconscious things. The way to get those things right is you need to visualize yourself doing it that way beforehand. I don't want to sound real woo-woo here. I'm not necessarily saying that visualizing success manifests it mystically. Maybe it does, but it's not necessary to think of it that way. The fact is, doing mental practice where you imagine yourself being really present in the interview, being really relaxed and really connecting with the employer, that's simply going to set up your brain and body to reproduce that same result later because you're mentally practicing it.
I love that. Yeah, the mental practice of being present and really thinking through that. Well, Thea, this has been a great conversation. We're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, I want to chat a little bit about the different types of interviews that are happening these days, video and in person, and seeing if there's a difference that you would recommend in how somebody prepare for those.
Sounds good, yeah.
Thanks for listening. Don't miss a single episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Welcome back. We're talking with Thea Kelley today, all about being authentic and strategic about your job interview. So, Thea, before we left the break, we had started to talk about the authenticity part of it. And we'd gone over in some detail, about how to be strategic. There are so many different types of interviews today that somebody could be asked to do. There's, what people traditionally think of as that face-to-face, come in, meet with a variety of people. There's also the telephone interview, and now even there's a lot more of the video interviews happening. Do you think there's differences in the way somebody needs to prepare and or portray themselves in those different avenues?
To some extent, the core is always the same. The core is knowing what your key messages are, your selling points, and communicating those in a purposeful way, in a compelling way. But you do need to be prepared for the different formats. And so, fortunately, when you schedule an interview with an employer, one of the first, they're going to tell you, okay, this is going to be a video interview, okay, this is a panel interview. But if they forget to, it's always a good idea to ask when you're scheduling the interview, is there any specific format to this? Is this just going to be a one-on-one sit-down or something else? So once you know, for example, that it's a video interview, you want to familiarize yourself with the technology ahead of time. So whether it's Skype or it's Google Hangouts or GoToMeeting, you want to practice with that, make sure that you know how you're going to go about it. A lot of times the employer will give you some way to practice it. They'll give you some instructions about that. No matter how clear their instructions seem, be sure you go through them ahead of time. Another thing that's really important for any video interview is, how you look. And how you look is always important. But in a video interview, there's a very specific emphasis or need in terms of lighting, because it's really easy to look bad on screen. Shadows, for instance, if the lighting is all from above, you can have these really dark, unflattering shadows on your face that might make you look kind of unpleasant. So you want to be sure you've got good lighting, which means some lighting coming from the sides and or in front of you, more than one light source. And it's nice if some of it is halogen. Halogen's a really nice light source. Sunlight also, if you can be in a room that has natural sunlight, that works really well. Aside from lighting, you want to wear a little bit of makeup. And now, of course, for women, this comes naturally. For men, though, especially if you're an older person and you're a little worried about age discrimination and you're being interviewed on video, it's really easy to look totally washed out, and you might actually consider using a little tinted lip balm. And you might also consider making sure your face isn't going to be too shiny. Maybe just borrow your wife or girlfriend's powder or buy some for yourself. Also, eye contact is a little tricky in a video interview, because if you're looking at the center of the screen, for instance, if you're seeing the face of someone who's interviewing you, you want to look in the center of the screen, but that's not going to look like eye contact. So you want to look actually at the camera a lot of the time. So you might need to practice that a little bit. That can actually be easier to do on a laptop, where the camera and the image of the person you're talking to are closer together. So you might consider using a laptop instead of a big old desktop computer. Those are some of the more important things. It's also just important to remember that even if it's a video, and even if you're videotaping it and not talking to the person in real time, know that a real person is listening to you or is going to be listening to you, and use your imagination to imagine that you're right there in the room with them. If you can do that, that's going to make it seem more authentic.
Those are such great tips. And I think that, with the advent of Skype, and lots of people can Skype their families, in far-flung places, and you can feel very connected to that. But a lot of times that can be a bit chaotic when it's just your family and you're fairly casual about it, and you've got people running around, and it's a bit more fun. But in a, business setting, really setting yourself up for success in how you, appear. And I love the thought about eye contact, right? Because it's definitely kind of a different piece where you want to look at the person on the screen, yet if that's not where the camera is, you look like you're looking down or to the side or something different, which could impede some of that feeling of authenticity over video.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, so if somebody is in an interview and, maybe they feel like they've made a mistake, maybe they feel like either they've been can you be too authentic, and or they feel like maybe they've been a little too stilted, right? Or a little too planful in the way they're, something they've just said just didn't come off right. Like, can people recover from those kinds of mistakes in an interview, you think?
Yes, the key thing is not to get too upset about it. And that's where taking a deep breath can help. And I know, we often say that. You hear people say, oh, take a breath. And then a lot of us feel like, oh, yeah, big deal. It's not going to make any difference. If it doesn't make a difference, it may be that you're not doing it right. So you might actually look it up online sometime, breathing for relaxation, and actually practice it a bit, because that could help you recover your balance if you think you've made a mistake. Another thing you can do, of course, is just in the moment, maybe just admit, that didn't come out the way I wanted it to. Let me try that again. Don't be afraid to just do something like that in an interview. And another thing you need to keep in mind if you've made a mistake is you might be able to some extent, correct it later in your thank you letter. So people call those thank you letters, but it's really about more than thank you. It's about thank you. It's about adding or tweaking something. And it can also be about making sure they understand how excited you still are. And it also can be about very briefly reminding them of some of your key selling points. So I know I got a little off topic there, but yes, that's some ways to recover from a mistake.
That's interesting. And I actually, you use the words recover your balance, right? And I think that goes back to this thought that, you need to balance your authenticity with the strategy of it. And that, that picture in my mind of the yin and the yang, as you've called it. And even using that thank you letter, that follow-up email to help bring back into balance maybe something that you felt got a little, out of balance during your interview. And that's an interesting sort of visual for me to take to heart.
Yeah, and I do like to think of it as a balance, and the yin and yang idea is a very good little mental reminder of these two things. And at the same time, authenticity and strategy are not opposites. So you don't want to take that metaphor too seriously and think that they're opposites, because you could be infinitely authentic and infinitely strategic at the same time. I know that sounds like kind of a tall order, but they aren't really interfering with each other.
Right. I like that. So as we've mentioned, Thea, you do have a book, Get That Job, The Quick and Complete Guide to a Winning Interview. So is your book all about just being authentic and being strategic?
Definitely not. That was kind of the heart of the book, the core of it, because I wanted to base it in something kind of deep like that. But it also is just a comprehensive, as the title implies, complete book about that includes things like how to answer specific questions. So there are dozens of common questions there with tips on how to answer them, and about asking smart questions, which is super important, and lots of sample questions that you can ask. It's about all the different types of interviews. So we talked a little about video interviews, but it's also about panel interviews, phone interviews, meal interviews, all different kinds, and how they have each their own unique challenges. And nonverbal communication, the importance of that, and of course the things like clothes and etiquette that are part of nonverbal communication, about staying calm and dealing with nerves and being as centered as you can be, and how to do that. Not just woo-woo, you need to do that, but how to do it. And right up to how you conclude the interview, what to say at the end, how to follow up, and even how to handle offers and how to juggle offers should you be in a position to have more than one, which doesn't all that rarely happen to people who've prepared very well.
That sounds like a very valuable tool. I'm excited for our listeners to be able to jump into that. So this has been a so valuable conversation, Thea. Thank you so much. I'd love to transition into some of the questions that we ask all of our guests. So, Thea, what was your first job?
My very first job was being a server at Carl's Jr., but very shortly after that, I was lucky enough to land a part-time job as a secretary in my boyfriend's law firm when I was just 18. And being a secretary taught me a lot about being organized. And I've always thought everybody could benefit from having been a secretary for a year or two at least. But it can be a hard job to advance out of, so I'm not recommending it for everybody.
Wonderful. And what is it? How does those like organizational skills and the things you still learn, how do you see those playing out today in your current jobs and current career?
Oh, it very much does, because as a job search coach, I run my own business. And I'm actually a one-person business, so I'm the marketing staff, and I'm the client contact staff, and I'm the bookkeeper. And so I need to be really organized.
And it's amazing, I think, some of those early jobs, how they really can build skills for you as you take forward. And many people, as you're going through some of those first jobs, you're not sure. You're just like, I'm just trying to get a paycheck, or somebody told me I needed a job this summer, or I knew I needed to make money for college, whatever. But you really can carry through so many of those things you learn.
Oh, and you can learn so much from your first job. A lot of it's going to be in the area of teamwork and communication and so on. And I found I even did some of my growing up on the job because I hadn't quite finished it at home. So you can learn a lot from any job, especially if you try to do it better than the other people around you. That's a really good idea.
Right, right. Well, Thea, what have you read or listened to lately that you would recommend to our listeners?
Other than my own Get That Job interviewing book, the book I most often recommend to clients is The 2-Hour Job Search by Steve Dalton. It is just a wonderful book about using a proactive, networking-based approach to getting a job. And he makes a science out of it, and he tells you exactly how to develop a list of employers you're interested in, how to develop contacts within those employers, even from scratch, how to write the email to approach them, how to have a conversation with the person there, how to follow up afterwards. It's excellent, and I have no vested interest in this book. I just think it's great, The 2-Hour Job Search by Steve Dalton.
I love it. I'll definitely have to look that up. It sounds compelling.
Mm-hmm. Get him on your show.
Ooh, there's an idea. I love it.
Yeah.
So, Thea, what would your 90-year-old self say to you today? If 90-year-old Thea walked in your door, what do you think she'd say to you?
I think she'd say, relax and smile, and then everything else will go better.
I love that. I love the smile piece too, right? Because it sort of, when you smile, you just feel better about yourself, right? And feel better about the day.
I think that's good advice for a job seeker.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Thea, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on the Career Q and chatting with me today. If our listeners want to get in touch with you and learn more about you or learn more about your book, how can they do that? Okay,
they can just email me. My email address is Thea@TheaKelley.com. And they can find my book on Amazon as well.
Great. Wonderful. And we will definitely have a link out to your book and a link to your contact information when we post the podcast. So to our listeners, I'd like to say thanks for listening to today's episode. And be sure to head over to thecareerq.com to read the show notes and find out more information about being authentic and strategic in your job interview and more information about Thea Kelley. Thanks for being on the show today, Thea.
Thank you so much. It's been a blast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Jack Straw Cultural Center in the lovely Seattle, Washington.